Every city has a story it tells about itself. Los Angeles tells you it's the place where dreams come true. And maybe that's right. But every dream has a shadow. And the shadow of Los Angeles stretches back further than most people know. Further than the movies. Further than the mansions. Further than the first oil derricks and the first orange groves and the first desperate families rolling in from the Dust Bowl with nothing but hope in their pockets. The shadow of Los Angeles begins here, on this land, before it had a name anyone alive today would recognize. Imagine Los Angeles without a single building. No freeways, no concrete, no smog sitting heavy over the basin on an August afternoon. Just land. Oak forests stretching down to the coast. Rivers, real rivers, not the concrete channels you see today, running cold and clear through the valley. Wetlands full of birds. Hills covered in sage and wildflower. And people. The Tongva had lived here for at least 3,000 years. Some estimates say 5,000, maybe more. 3,000 years. To put that in perspective, when the Tongva first settled this land, ancient Rome didn't exist yet. The pyramids of Egypt were already 1,000 years old. They were not wanderers. They were not primitive. They built permanent villages, some with populations in the hundreds. They had trade networks that stretched hundreds of miles up and down the California coast. They had astronomy, medicine, ceremony, art, language. They called this place Tovangar. It was their world. And by any measure, it was a good world. And then one day, on the horizon, something appeared that the Tongva had never seen before. Sails. A Spanish expedition led by Gaspar de Portola marched north through California. Soldiers, priests, and ambition, looking for places to plant the flag of the Spanish Empire. When they reached the LA Basin, they found the Tongva villages. They noted the population, the resources, the rivers. They made their plans. 2 years later, in 1771, the Mission San Gabriel Arcangel was founded, just a few miles east of where downtown Los Angeles stands today. From the outside, it looked like an act of faith, a church, a cross, priests in robes offering salvation to the native people. But here is what salvation looked like in practice. The Tongva were brought into the missions, sometimes voluntarily, drawn by gifts and curiosity. But once inside, leaving was not an option. The missions were, in every meaningful sense of the word, labor camps wrapped in the language of God. Inside those walls, the Tongva were forbidden from speaking their own language, forbidden from practicing their own ceremonies, forbidden from maintaining their own families in the traditional way. Children were separated from parents, husbands from wives. They worked from before sunrise until after sunset, building, farming, serving. And they died. Disease, smallpox, measles, diseases the Tongva had no immunity to, tore through the mission populations with terrifying speed. But disease alone doesn't explain what happened. The records show systematic abuse, punishment for speaking Tongva, punishment for practicing old ceremonies in secret, punishment for trying to leave. When the mission period began, there were an estimated 15,000 Tongva people in the Los Angeles basin. By the time the missions ended, that number had fallen by more than 80%. More than 80%. 12,000 people gone within 2 generations. Not in a war, not in a single dramatic massacre that gets written into the history books. Just gone. Slowly, systematically, in the shadow of a cross. On the 4th of September, 1781, 10 years after the mission was founded, Los Angeles was officially established as a civilian settlement. El Pueblo de la Reina de Los Ángeles, the town of the Queen of the Angels. 44 people. That's how many settlers Spain sent to found what would one day become one of the largest cities on Earth. 44 people. For 200 years, the story of those 44 founders was buried, hidden, quietly erased from the official narrative of the city. Because here is the truth that Los Angeles didn't want to tell about itself. Of those 44 founding settlers, 26 were of African descent. Many others were of Native American or mixed heritage. Only 2 were classified as Spanish. The city that would one day become the global symbol of white American glamour and excess was founded by Black and indigenous families, poor families, frontier families, people the Spanish Empire considered expendable enough to send into uncertain territory. They built the first homes. They dug the first irrigation channels. They planted the first crops. And then history, very deliberately, forgot them. In 1821, after 11 years of bloody struggle, Mexico won its independence from Spain. And overnight, Los Angeles became Mexican territory. For the next 25 years, the LA Basin was rancho country. Vast estates, some of them hundreds of thousands of acres, spread across the landscape. Cattle by the tens of thousands. A life that, if you squinted at it from the right angle, looked almost like paradise. The ranchero families, the Californios, as they called themselves, built a culture that was genuinely beautiful in many ways. Music, horsemanship, hospitality, a deep connection to the land. But paradise, as we keep discovering in this story, always has a price someone else is paying. The rancho system did not run on goodwill. It ran on the labor of the surviving Tongva and other native people. Officially, they were not slaves. The law said they were free. But the law also said that native people who were found drunk, and the rancheros made sure alcohol was readily available, could be sentenced to labor to pay off their fines. A system designed to trap. A system designed to keep people working without ever calling it what it was. By the 1840s, Los Angeles was a town of perhaps 1,500 people. Dusty, remote, violent. A place where shootings and knife fights were common enough to barely register. It was nobody's idea of a great city, but that was about to change. Because to the east, a young and hungry nation had started looking west, and it liked what it saw. President James K. Polk wanted California. The ports, the land, the potential. He provoked a war with Mexico over a disputed stretch of Texas borderland. And when the fighting started, American forces moved into California almost immediately. The Mexican-American War lasted less than 2 years. By 1848, it was over. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the fighting, and transferred an enormous swath of territory, including all of California, to the United States. And it made a promise. Mexican citizens living in the ceded territories would have their rights protected. Their land grants would be honored. They would be treated as full American citizens. It was one of the most comprehensively broken promises in American history. What followed in Los Angeles was not a dramatic single event. It was something slower and in many ways more cruel. A systematic legal dismantling of Mexican land ownership that played out over decades. The Land Act of 1851 required California landowners to prove their titles before a commission. In theory, fair. In practice, devastating. The Californio families had land grants going back generations. But the grants were in Spanish. The legal system was in English. The process required lawyers, expensive lawyers. It required years of litigation. It required money that most rancho families, land-rich but cash-poor, simply did not have. And circling those families, like lawyers have circled vulnerable people in every era of human history, were the speculators. American businessmen who understood exactly how the system worked, who bought up debt, who filed competing claims, who waited. Within a generation, a single generation, nearly every major Californio landowning family in the Los Angeles area had lost their land. The Lugos, the Sepulvedas, the Verdugos. Names that survive today only as street signs and neighborhood names in a city that took everything they had. They were not conquered in battle. They were buried in paperwork. So this is where Los Angeles begins. On land stolen from the Tongva, who lost not just their territory, but their language, their children, and 80% of their people. Founded by Black and Indigenous families whose names were erased from the story within a generation. Built on a rancho system that called itself civilization while running on coerced labor. And then taken, not by conquest, but by contract, from the Mexican families who had made it their home. Every layer of this city's foundation is soaked in someone else's loss. And we've barely started. Because in the decades that followed, Los Angeles was about to grow. Fast, explosively, chaotically. New people were coming, new money, new power. And with them, new darkness. Next time, we follow the men who arrived with ambition, with railroad money, and with absolutely no intention of sharing any of it. The dark history of Los Angeles continues.